The Phoenix Theater and Arts Company's audio drama series presents two stories from L. Frank Baum's American Fairy Tales, adapted and directed by Phil Pinault. For past episodes, upcoming events, and other information, make sure to visit our website at phoenixtheaterartsco.com. That's theater with an R-E. Without further ado, we give you American Fairy Tales.
The King of the Polar Bears.
The King of the Polar Bears lived among the icebergs in the far north country. He was old and monstrous and big, and he was wise and friendly to all who knew him. His body was thickly covered with long white fur that glistened like silver under the rays of the midnight sun. His claws were strong and sharp, so that he might walk safely over the smooth ice, or grasp and tear the fishes and seals upon which he fed. The seals were afraid when he drew near, and tried to avoid him. But the gulls, both white and gray, loved him because he left the remnants of his feasts for them to devour. Often his subjects, the other polar bears, came to him for advice when ill or in trouble, but they wisely kept away from his hunting grounds, lest they might interfere with his sport and arouse his anger. The wolves, who sometimes came as far north as the icebergs, whispered among themselves that the king of the polar bears was either a magician or under the protection of a powerful fairy, for no earthly being seemed able to harm him. He never failed to secure plenty of food, and he grew bigger and stronger day by day and year by year. Yet the time came when this monarch of the north met man, and his wisdom failed him. He came out of his cave among the icebergs one day and saw a boat moving through the strip of water which had been uncovered by the shifting of the summer ice. In the boat were men. The great bear had never seen such creatures before, and therefore advanced towards the boat, sniffing the strange scent with aroused curiosity and wondering whether he might take them for friends or foes, food or carrion. When the king came near the water's edge, a man stood up in the boat, and with a queer instrument made a loud bang. The polar bear felt a shock. His brain became numb. His thoughts deserted him. His great limbs shook and gave way beneath him, and his body fell heavily upon the hard ice. That was all he remembered for a time. When he awoke, he was smarting with pain on every inch of his huge bulk, for the men had cut away his hide with its glorious white hair, and carried it with them to a distant ship. Above him circled thousands of his friends, the gulls, wondering if their benefactor was really dead and it was proper to eat him. But when they saw him raise his head and groan and tremble, they knew he still lived. And one of them, the queen gull, said to her comrades,
"The wolves were right. The king is a great magician, for even men cannot kill him. But he suffers for lack of covering. Let us repay his kindness to us by each giving him as many feathers as we can spare."
This idea pleased the gulls. One after another they plucked with their beaks the softest feathers from under their wings, and flying down, dropped them gently upon the body of the king of the polar bears. Then the queen called to him,
"Courage, friend. Our feathers are as soft and beautiful as your own shaggy hair. They will guard you from the cold winds and warm you while you sleep. Have courage, then, and live."
And the king of the polar bears had courage to bear his pain, and lived, and was strong again. The feathers grew, as they had grown upon the bodies of the birds, and covered him as his own hair had done. Mostly they were pure white in color, but some from the gray gulls gave his majesty a slightly mottled appearance. The rest of that summer, and all through the 6 months of night, the king left his icy cavern only to fish or catch seals for food. He felt no shame at his feathery covering, but it was still strange to him, and he avoided meeting any of the other bears. During this period of retirement, he thought much of the men who had harmed him, and remembered the way they had made the great bang. And he decided it was best to keep away from such fierce creatures. This he added to his store of wisdom. When the moon fell away from the sky, and the sun came to make the icebergs glitter with the gorgeous tintings of the rainbow, a polar bear arrived at the king's cavern to ask his advice about the hunting season. But when she saw his great body covered with feathers instead of hair, she began to laugh and said,
Our mighty king has become a bird. Who ever before heard of a feathered polar bear?
Then the king gave way to wrath. He advanced upon her with deep growls and stately tread, and with one blow of his monstrous paw, stretched the mocker lifeless at his feet. She ran away to her fellows and carried the news of the king's strange appearance. The result was a meeting of all the polar bears upon a broad field of ice, where they talked gravely of the remarkable change that had come upon their monarch.
He is, in reality, no longer a bear, nor can he justly be called a bird. But he is half bird and half bear, and so unfitted to remain our king.
Then who shall take his place?
He or she who can fight the bird bear and overcome him. Only the strongest is fit to rule our race. And that is me. I will fight him. I, Wolf, the strongest of our race. And I will be king of the polar bears.
And the others nodded assent and dispatched a messenger to the king to say he must fight the great wolf and master him, or resign his sovereignty.
For a bear with feathers is no bear at all, and the king we obey must resemble the rest of us.
I wear feathers because it pleases me. Am I not a great magician? But I will fight, nevertheless, and if Wolf masters me, he shall be king in my stead.
Then he visited his friends, the gulls, and told them of the coming battle.
I shall conquer. Yet my people are in the right, for only a hairy one like themselves can hope to command their obedience.
I met an eagle yesterday, which had made its escape from a big city of men, and the eagle told me he had seen a monstrous polar bear skin thrown over the back of a carriage that rolled along the street. That skin must have been yours, O king, and if you wish, I will send 100 of my gulls to the city to bring it back to you.
Let them go.
And the 100 gulls were soon flying rapidly southward. For 3 days they flew straight as an arrow until they came to the scattered houses, to villages, and to cities. Then their search began. The gulls were brave, cunning, and wise. Upon the 4th day they reached the great metropolis, and hovered over the streets until a carriage rolled along with a great white bear robe thrown over the back seat. Then the birds swooped down, a whole 100 of them, and seizing the skin in their beaks, quickly flew away. They were late. The king's great battle was upon the 7th day, and they must fly swiftly to reach the polar regions by that time. Meanwhile, the bird bear was preparing for his fight. He sharpened his claws in the small crevices of the ice. He caught a seal and tested his big yellow teeth by crunching its bones between them. And the queen gull set her band to pluming the king bear's feathers until they lay smoothly upon his body. But every day they cast anxious glances into the southern sky, watching for the 100 gulls to bring back the king's own skin. The 7th day came, and all the polar bears in that region gathered around the king's cavern. Among them was Wolf, strong and confident of his success.
The bird bear's feathers will fly fast enough when I get my claws upon him.
The king was disappointed at not having recovered his skin, but he resolved to fight bravely without it. He advanced from the opening of his cavern with a proud and kingly bearing, and when he faced his enemy, he gave so terrible a growl that Wolf's heart stopped beating for a moment. And he began to realize that a fight with the wise and mighty king of his race was no laughing matter. After exchanging 1 or 2 heavy blows with his foe, Wolf's courage returned, and he determined to dishearten his adversary by bluster.
Come nearer, bird bear. Come nearer that I may pluck your plumage.
The defiance filled the king with rage. He ruffled his feathers as a bird does till he appeared to be twice his actual size. Then he strode forward and struck Wolf so powerful a blow that his skull cracked like an eggshell, and he fell prone upon the ground. While the assembled bears stood looking with fear and wonder at their fallen champion, the sky became darkened. 100 gulls flew down from above and dripped upon the king's body a skin covered with pure white hair that glittered in the sun like silver. And behold, the bears saw before them the well-known form of their wise and respected master, and with one accord they bowed their shaggy heads in homage to the mighty king of the polar bears.
The capture of Father Time.
I was the son of a cowboy living on the broad plains of Arizona. My father trained me to lasso a bronco or a young bull with perfect accuracy, and I'd possess the strength to back up this skill. I would have been as good a cowboy as any in all of Arizona. When I was 12 years old, I made my first visit to the east where my Uncle Charles, my father's brother, lived, and I took my lasso with me because I wanted to show my cousins what a cowboy could do. At first, the city boys and girls were much interested in watching me lasso posts and fence pickets, but they soon grew tired of it, and I soon decided it wasn't the right sort of sport for the city. But one day the butcher asked me to ride one of his horses into the country to a pasture that had just been engaged, and I eagerly consented. I had been longing for a horseback ride, and to make it seem like old times, I took my lasso with me. I rode through the streets demurely enough, but upon reaching the country roads, my spirits broke forth into a wild jubilation, and urging the butcher's horse on to a full gallop, I dashed away in a true cowboy fashion. I let down the bars that led into a big field and began riding over the meadows and throwing my lasso at imaginary cattle while I yelled and I whooped to my heart's content. Suddenly, on making a long cast with my lasso, the loop caught upon something and rested about 3 feet from the ground, while the rope drew taut and nearly pulled me from my horse. My eyes grew big with amazement, and I knew I had caught something when I heard a voice cry out.
"Here, let go. Let go, I say. Can't you see what you've done?"
I couldn't see it, and I did not intend to let it go until I found out what was holding the loop of the lasso, so I resorted to an old trick my father taught me. I put the butcher's horse into a run and began riding in a circle around the spot where my lasso had caught. I drew nearer and nearer, and I saw that one end of the lasso was made fast to a ring on the saddle, and when the rope was almost wound up and the horse began to pull away in sudden fear, I dismounted. Holding the reins of the bridle in one hand, I followed the rope, and an instant later I saw an old man caught fast in the coils of the lasso. The man's head was bald and uncovered, but long white whiskers grew down to his waist, and about his body was thrown a loose robe of fine white linen. In one hand he bore a great scythe, and beneath the other arm he carried an hourglass. This venerable old man spoke in an angry voice.
"Now then, get that rope off as fast as you can. You've brought everything on earth to a standstill by your foolishness. Well, what are you staring at? Don't you know who I am?"
"No, sir."
"Well, I'm Time. Father Time. Now make haste and set me free, if you want the world to run properly."
"How did I happen to catch you?"
"I don't know. I've never been caught before. But I suppose it was because you were foolishly throwing your lasso at nothing."
I didn't see you."
"Of course you didn't. I'm invisible to the eyes of human beings unless they get within 3 feet of me, and I take care to keep more than that distance away from them. That's why I was crossing this field, where I supposed no one would be. And I should have been perfectly safe had it not been for your beastly lasso. Now then, are you going to get that rope off?"
"Why should I?"
"Because everything in the world stopped moving the moment you caught me. I don't suppose you want to make an end of all business and pleasure and war and love and misery and ambition and everything else, do you? Not a watch has ticked since you tied me up here like a mummy."
I laughed. I thought it was really funny seeing this old man wound round and round with coils of rope from his knees up to his chin. It'll do you good to rest. From all I've heard, you lead a rather busy life.
"Indeed I do. I'm due in Kamchatka this very minute. And to think one boy is upsetting all my regular habits."
Too bad. But since the world has stopped anyhow, it won't matter if it takes a little longer recess. As soon as I let you go, time will fly again. Where are your wings?
"I haven't any. That is a story cooked up by someone who never saw me. As a matter of fact, I move rather slowly.
I see. Take your time. What do you use that scythe for?
To mow down the people. Every time I swing my scythe, someone dies.
Then I ought to win a life-saving medal by keeping you tied up. Some folks will live this much longer.
But they won't know it, so it will do them no good. You may as well untie me at once.
No, I may never catch you again, so I'll hold on to you for a while and see how the world goes on without you. Then I swung up the old man, bound as he was, upon the back of the butcher's horse, and getting into the saddle myself, started back towards the town, one hand on my prisoner, the other hand guiding the reins. When I reached the road, my eyes saw something strange. A horse and buggy stood in the middle of the road, and the horse in the act of trotting, with his head held high and 2 legs in the air, but perfectly motionless. In the buggy, a man and a woman were seated, but had they been turned to stone, they could not have been more stiff and still.
There's no time for them. Won't you let me go now?
Not yet. I rode on until we reached the city, where all the people stood in exactly the same position they had been in when I lassoed Father Time. Stopping in front of a big dry goods store, I hitched up my horse and went in. The clerks were measuring out goods and showing patterns to the rows of customers in front of them, but everyone suddenly seemed to become statues. There was something very unpleasant about this scene, and a cold shiver began to run up and down my back, and so I hurried out again. On the edge of the sidewalk sat a poor crippled beggar, holding out his hat, and beside him stood a prosperous-looking gentleman who was about to drop a penny into the beggar's hand. I knew this gentleman to be very rich, but very stingy, so I ran my hand into the man's pocket and took out his purse, in which there was a $20 gold piece. I put the glittering coin into the gentleman's fingers instead of the penny, and then restored the purse to the rich man's pocket. I mounted the horse up again and rode up the street. As I passed the shop of my friend the butcher, I noticed several pieces of meat hanging outside. I'm afraid that meat'll spoil.
It takes time to spoil meat.
Seems time meddles with everything.
Yes, you've made a prisoner of the most important personage in the world, and you haven't enough sense to let him go again.
I did not reply, and soon we came up to my uncle's house, where I dismounted. The streets were filled with teams and people, but all were motionless, and my 2 little cousins were just coming out of the gate on their way to school, with their books and their slates underneath their arms, so I had to jump over the fence to avoid knocking them down. In the front room sat my aunt reading her Bible. She was just turning the page when time stopped. In the dining room was my uncle just finishing his lunch. His mouth was open and his fork poised just before it, while his eyes were fixed upon the newspaper folded beside him. I helped myself to my uncle's pie, and while I ate it, I walked out to my prisoner. There's one thing I don't understand.
What's that?
Why is it that I'm able to move around while everybody else is, froze up?
That is because I am your prisoner. You can do anything you wish with time now, but unless you are careful, you'll do something you will be sorry for.
I threw the crust of the pie at a bird that had been suspended in the air, where it had been flying when time stopped. Anyways, I'm living longer than anyone else, no one will ever be able to catch up with me again.
Each life has its allotted span. When you have lived your proper time, my scythe will mow you down.
I forgot your scythe. Then a spirit of mischief came into my head, for I happened to think that the present opportunity to have fun would never occur again. I tied Father Time up to my uncle's hitching post and then crossed the street to the corner grocery. The grocer had scolded me that very morning for stepping into a basket of turnips by accident, so I went to the back of the grocery and turned on the faucets of the molasses barrels. He'll make a nice mess when time starts, the molasses running all over the floor, I said with a laugh. A little further down the street was a barber shop, and sitting in the barber's chair I saw the man that all the boys declared was the meanest man in town. He certainly did not like us, and we knew it. The barber was in the act of shampooing a person when Time was captured. I ran to the drugstore and got a bottle of mucilage and returned and poured it all over the ruffled hair of the unpopular citizen. Next, I entered the schoolhouse and found that only a few of the pupils were actually assembled, but the teacher sat at her desk, stern and frowning as usual. Taking a piece of chalk, I marked upon the blackboard in big letters the following words: "Every scholar is required to yell the minute he enters the room. He will also please throw his books at the teacher's head. Signed, Professor Sharp." Then I remembered my prisoner, and I walked back to the hitching post. I came within 3 feet and saw Father Time still standing patiently within the toils of the lasso. He looked angry and annoyed, however, and growled out,
"Well, when do you intend to release me?"
"So I've been thinking about that ugly scythe of yours."
"What about it?"
"Well, perhaps if I do let you go, you'll swing it at me first thing to be revenged."
I've known boys for thousands of years, and of course I know they're mischievous and reckless, but I like boys, because they grow up to be men and people my world. Now, if a man had caught me by accident, as you did, I could have scared him into letting me go instantly. But boys are harder to scare. I don't know as I blame you. I was a boy myself long ago, when the world was new. But surely you've had enough fun with me by this time, and now I hope you'll show the respect that is due to old age. Let me go, and in return, I will promise to forget all about my capture. The incident won't do much harm anyway, for no one will ever know that time has halted the last 3 hours or so.
All right, since you promised not to mow me down, I'll let you go. I carefully unwound the rope from the old man who, when he was free, at once shouldered his scythe, rearranged his white robes, and nodded farewell. The next moment he had disappeared, and with a rustle and a rumble and a roar of activity, the world came back to life again and jogged along as it had once before. I wound up my lasso, mounted the butcher's horse, and rode slowly down the street. As I rode past the schoolhouse, I heard a tremendous chorus of yells, and I knew Professor Sharp was having a hard time calling the riot caused by the sign on the blackboard. Through the window of the barber shop, I saw the mean man frantically belaboring the barber with his hairbrush, while his hair stood stiff as bayonets in all directions. And the grocer ran out the door and yelled, "Fire!" while his shoes left tracks of molasses wherever he stepped. My heart was filled with joy, and I was reveling in the excitement I had caused when someone caught my leg and pulled me from the horse.
What are you doing here, you rascal? Didn't you promise to put that beast into Plimpton's pasture? And now I find you riding the poor nag around like a gentleman at leisure.
That's a fact. I clean forgot about the horse.
PTAC's audio drama series is a production by the Phoenix Theater and Arts Company. This week's episode had 2 stories from L. Frank Baum's American Fairy Tales, The King of the Polar Bears and The Capture of Father Time. This episode was adapted and directed by Phil Pinault and edited by Gina Stanton. The King of the Polar Bears features the vocal talents of Joe Coppola as the narrator, Amanda Booth as the Queen Gull and a bear, John Isabella as Wolf, and Phil Pinault as the King of the Polar Bears. The Capture of Father Time features the vocal talents of Ryan Snanooge as Jim and the narrator, and Ken Shelby as Father Time. Original PTAC music by Brian Sanishin. For a full listing of credits, visit us at phoenixtheaterartsco.com. That's theater with an R-E. While you're there, please consider clicking the donate link. That would be delightful. Have comments or questions? Email us at phoenixtheaterartsco@gmail.com or find us on social media. A very special thank you to our Patreon subscribers, with a shout out to those sitting in the box seats, Ken Shelby, and on stage seating, Margaret Thurston. We couldn't do this without you. Join us next time for an episode of Summer Poetry.